Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Allison Buccola. Allison is the author of The Ascent and Catch Her When She Falls. She has a JD from the University of Chicago and lives in the Chicago suburbs with her husband and their 2 young children and a recent addition of a puppy, it sounds like. Thank you for joining us today, Allison. It's so nice to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm so excited.
I love the cover. I love this book, The Ascent. Who doesn't love a cult? There's just something so appealing about a cult. So tell our listeners a little bit about The Ascent.
Yeah, so The Ascent is about a woman named Lee Burton, and she grew up in a reclusive cult. And one morning when she was 12 years old, she wakes up and everyone has disappeared. So her mother is gone, her sister is gone, everyone that she's ever known is gone. So the book starts when we're 20 years later, and she is living in Philadelphia. She's a new mother. She's sort of struggling with new motherhood, and kind of going through some anxiety, some paranoia, and someone shows up at her front door claiming to have answers to the mysteries of her past. And the book kind of takes off from there.
Yeah, it's so fabulous. And we don't do spoilers, but there are some really fabulous twists because I think with cult books, right? There's a few of them out there and we sort of think we know how things are gonna, turn out. But you did a fabulous job of presenting the unexpected, but also an ending that made sense, which I
Well,
think
thank
is like the sort of like that's the boxes I want to read when I'm reading a book. Those are the boxes I want to be ticked. Is like, does this make sense and does it totally blow my expectations out of the water? So congratulations, this was super fun.
you.
So we were just talking kind of briefly because your children are a little older than Lucy is an infant. Ophelia, who goes by Lee's daughter, and her husband is in the district attorney's office. Is that what that's right, right? He's in
Yeah.
the, yeah, okay. And working, of course, full time, and now they've got less income. This is sort of just exactly the setup for like new motherhood stress, right? You're kind of on your own. You're trying to navigate it. She doesn't obviously have her mother in her life. So it's really overwhelming. And then, your husband's always gone, which I think we all feel. So tell us about sort of the inspiration for the book, and in general, I'm curious to know how ideas come to you when you're sort of writing. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so my kids are, I'm now like a little out of the new motherhood phase, but my kids are 5 and 8. So when I started the idea for the book, I was much closer to it. And I did, the new motherhood period is it's such an overwhelming experience. And it's a very physical experience. It can be a very isolating experience. And I wanted to write something that sort of incorporated that experience into a thriller. And I think there's a lot of great thrillers right now that are really sort of like diving into like mom noir and the kind of stresses that go along with motherhood.
Mom noir, is that what you?
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I also write mom noir. I love that.
Uh-huh.
Hang on to that.
I think it's so fun. And so I wanted to write something that sort of explored that. And then at the same time, I think a lot of other people, I'm very interested in sort of, well, intentional communities on the one hand, and then cults, which I think are sort of what happen when intentional communities go bad.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to write about a character who had like grown up in one of those communities, and now is sort of struggling to adjust to mainstream society. So Lee, in addition to like some of the isolation that new mothers go through, is also struggling with the isolation that comes from having been a part of that group and not having totally assimilated into regular society yet.
Right. And in addition, her husband doesn't know all the details, right? I mean, he doesn't
That's
really
right.
know.
Yeah.
But she's additionally isolated because she doesn't have, any sort of support about having survived that. I mean, she really has not leaned in. And I love that Theo's mother is like a therapist, right? Because it's like kind of it's like the worst possible mother-in-law to have, right? Is one who is sort of watching you all the time to sort of see how you're doing with new motherhood. And she obviously, they both, I mean, it's clear that Lee is struggling. And so that everyone's trying to help her. But in a way that I think that's another struggle of new motherhood is you're like, I can do, you don't want to sort of be doubted about your ability to handle it. Even though obviously it would be really lovely if somebody just stepped in and was like, let me handle this half the time because it's a lot. So there's a balance too about needing sort of to feel competent about it. And yet being really, most of us are kind of completely incompetent at the beginning, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think her mother-in-law character was a lot of fun to write. She was one of my favorite characters.
Yeah.
And then Lee is also part of this new moms group that I really enjoyed
Yes,
writing.
yes.
And I do feel like you're getting all this, you're getting lots of advice from all different places, and it's not all consistent. And advice is not always the same thing as help or support. And so I think she's sort of going through that.
And there are the new moms in those groups, which we've all experienced too, because the way that insecurity shows up is oftentimes like the opposite of sh looking insecure, right? These mothers sort of
Mhm.
boast about how well the baby's doing, how well they're doing, when you know that when you have some distance from it, you're probably like, wow, she was probably really suffering. But in the
Yeah,
moment, you're like, thanks for like rubbing my face in it because I'm suffering over here and it sounds like you're
yeah,
doing fine. So it's that everybody's at a different space and everybody's at a different space kind of day by day. I mean, day to
yeah.
day, right? One day is you can feel really like you got this, and the next day, if you don't sleep, it's like you have no idea what you're doing. So I really, and I'm 20. I mean, my baby is 23, and I still like I read a book, like I read the Ascent, and I'm like, oh, I remember, I'm back. You can get some distance from it, and still, those days they're imprinted. It's really,
Oh yeah, they're really visceral. I mean, it's a really physical time. You're doing it.
you're doing
So,
it. And there is a sense that, and I know this is sort of always the topic about women, is that some women, other mothers are oftentimes the worst support system for mothers, because we're probably ultimately really hard on ourselves about it.
hmm.
But then that sort of translates to being really hard on each other. So sort of,
Yeah,
the stay-at-home mom versus the working mom versus nobody's kind of doing it right. And it's brutal, right? I mean,
it is brutal. And I think the truth is, and I think it's again something that you can kind of see once you get more distance, like there are lots of ways of doing it right,
yeah.
but everything feels so important and so big. And like there's so many ways to get it wrong when you're in it that I think everyone is really, not everyone, but a lot of people are like really concerned about justifying their own choices and feeling like they've made the right decisions. And I think that can sometimes get tough. That can create a tough environment.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think that is exactly right. We all need to feel like we're doing it right. And it does seem like there's just one right way. And,
Yeah.
which is, my God, can you imagine? And then I also think, like, look at the way I mean, I'm in an older generation even than you are, but look at the way we grew up. We like, we had so much more, less structure and
Oh yeah.
we all did fine.
Absolutely. Well, and I also feel like I don't know if like when I had my daughter, my second kid, after having the second kid and just seeing how different they were and
I
like what different things they needed and how I'm just like there's obviously no one right way to do this because
Right.
like there's not even one right way for my own children to do things and
And
I
then
don't
I
know.
know, and that it is a little bit disheartening, I think, the second child, because you're like, I got this. I remember I can do this. And then everything they do is different. And you're like, well, dang, like what the hell? I
Oh
thought
yeah.
I had this, but this kid is totally different than the first kid. So tell
Oh
us,
yeah.
obviously, you were inspired, of course, by motherhood and and I haven't read your first book yet, but so is that also in the sort of mom noir?
No, so it is also psychological suspense, but that one, the character is not a mom yet. So it takes place in a different period of life.
Yes, well, that's fair. I mean, the more you know as the more you know as a writer, the more your real life sort of soaks into these stories. So tell us
Mhm.
how the story was inspired. Was it, how did you come to the idea of writing about a cult?
Yeah, so I knew in general that I sort of wanted to write something cult related. And so I was watching a lot of documentaries and I was reading a lot of interviews. And I kept on finding myself drawn to the stories of survivors and in particular their stories about what their experience was like after they left the cult. So I feel like I really enjoy stories that are about the like what draws you into a cult and like this people's struggles to leave the cult.
Yeah,
But I haven't seen as many stories in fiction about like what happens to people after they've
I
left.
agree. I agree. Yeah.
Um, and so that's sort of how I came up with the character of Lee, is I wanted to write about someone who, I mean, she didn't leave exactly. The cult left her. Like she wakes up and they're
Yeah.
gone. But she has that experience of trying to reintegrate into society. And so the book is sort of about her struggles to do that.
Yeah. And Theo has a sort of, she's so, I mean, even in their marriage, right? Theo has like his law school friends and his college friends, and he's got sort of a community around him. And she is very isolated. I mean, I think and self-sufficient. I think you'd have to be, right? You imagine like, I mean, talk about the ultimate your ultimate fear as a 12-year-old, right? Is that your whole family, your whole world is just like, and we do see some of how she handles it when she ends up with her aunt. And I appreciated that too, that the sort of like the struggle of like assimilating into a different family and, and the way that her cousins responded to her, right? Because she's kind of I mean, in their minds, right? She's a little bit of a freak, right? You don't, I mean, it brings a lot of attention to the family who adopts her too.
Mhm.
You can see how that would be. I mean, as a kid, like these are all children, right? And everybody's, it's all such a struggle at that age. I mean, she's what, 12? Is it she 12 when they
Yeah, she's
meet
12.
her? And then she's got one cousin's a little younger and one's a little older. And that's all that terrible middle school, it's
Yeah,
like the worst,
rough time.
worst,
Yeah.
worst time. So,
Uh-huh.
so I totally appreciate that. And then so how do you once you sort of had the idea and Lee was developing, did you know sort of how the story would unfold? Do you plan that out or does that happen more naturally, organically?
Yeah, so this book I sold on proposal. I wrote up my first six chapters and I wrote up my outline, I sent it in and I got it approved. And then I was trying to like write to the end that I had written in the outline. And I was like, this just doesn't work. Like this is not, it's not where
Yeah.
the characters want to go. It's not where the story wants to go. So no, so I did not really like I in theory planned it ahead of
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
but everything everything changed when I was actually writing it.
Which makes total sense. I mean, I do think that is so many of us are doing or end up doing the same thing. And I forgot that this is your sophomore novel, which of course everybody talks about the sophomore novel, right? Because your first book, you kind of have all the time in the world to write
Oh
it.
yeah.
And you can't, it's not going to get anywhere until it's kind of as perfect can be. And you don't have that kind of timeline with the second novel. So how was that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was under a little less pressure than some people are under because I sold them independently. So I did not have the same like sort of time crunch that
Okay.
some people have
Yeah.
to get it out. So that was helpful. And it was also helpful because I was kind of slow in getting to this idea.
Yeah.
But it's very different. And I think that writing the second novel is also different because when you're writing the first one, you're also kind of writing it for you and you're writing it to see if you can. And there's like you hope that someone will see this someday, but like feels sort of like a pipe dream.
Yes.
And I don't know, when I was writing the second one and when we'd already sold the second one, I was like, well, like people are going to see this. And
Right.
it's such a different writing experience when you know that like other eyes are going to be on this thing. So yeah, so that was a little stressful.
It increases the pressure of it for sure. But
Yeah.
actually, I mean, I think you did a fabulous job because I do think sometimes, we see, you can f sort of feel, not that second novels are generally, not as good, but you sometimes feel that authors struggle in the process. So it's
Mhm.
also, I think, there's something really powerful about learning that you can outline something, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I think sometimes that takes a lot of books before you're like, this just because a lot of people, once you have an outline, you're like, I can pigeonhole this thing into the outline. So you were like, no, this is not working.
Yeah, it wasn't really freeing. I mean, it felt freeing, but also scary because then
Of
I
course.
submitted it and I submitted the manuscript and I was like, oh, I hope they're okay with this ending too. But it was fine.
Yes, I'm sure. And I do think an ending, I think, and I'm biased, of course, because I don't outline. So therefore, not outlining it has to be a right way at least. I do feel like there's something magical that happens in the process of letting the characters do what they're going to do. And obviously, people who outline, do it incredibly well. But for me, that would just never work.
Oh, I agree 100%. And I just can't, I like the way that I think about a story, I have to be sitting down and writing out what the characters are doing to kind of figure out who the characters are and like where the story needs to go. I am so, I am so impressed by and jealous of people who can kind of like plan it all out in advance and then do it. But I just can't, like, my brain does not function in that way.
And I always think about that. Like, I've talked to obviously talked to tons of incredibly successful authors who do it that way too. I do think that in that process, they're doing a lot more sort of staring out the window in the early days,
Yeah.
right? And sort of letting, but for me, I think a kinesthetic learner. So for me, I have to sort of do in order to understand. And so they're doing that all in their heads, which again, like you said, seems wildly impressive and
Yeah,
impossible.
I like that description for it. I haven't heard kinesthetic learner before, but I think that might be what I am too.
Yeah,
So
I just like the
great use
idea
of
that you
that.
have to do to
Yeah.
learn. And somebody tries to explain something to me, I'm like, could you like, could you give me like a concrete example? Because that's,
Mhm.
and it's funny when you get feedback from your editor too. I'm like, I have no idea what you're trying to say. So tell me a different way. Um, so now, did you work with the same editor on both books?
I did. Yeah.
Okay, so that's fun. And
That
what
was
was
great.
that relationship like? I mean, so did you feel like you got a lot of, were you sending chunks in of the second book? Was she or he sort of heavy-handed? How did you, because I think that's always a really interesting, when it works, it's amazing.
Mhm.
And when it
Yeah.
doesn't,
So Andrea was my editor for these books, and looked at she gave me some feedback when I had like initially started. So when I like started writing sort of a cult book in a different direction,
yeah.
and she was like, "No, you
Okay.
should
Yeah.
not be going in this
Like,
direction."
okay.
Uh, um, and then I submitted the first six chapters, and she gave me some feedback on like what direction the book should go in. And then when I finally handed in the manuscript, I think she has sometimes sort of a lighter touch. So it was not like extensive feedback on it, but really great big picture ideas about where the characters should go and how that should work. And it is fun. It's nice working with someone on two different projects because you kind of know what to expect and
Right.
know how to read things and can kind of understand what's going on a little
Right. It's,
better.
it is a when it's a lovely partnership. I mean, this business is so solitary. So much of it is spent just like literally just banging your head against a keyboard. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. When you're working, do you have beta readers? Are you like some people are very like nobody sees it until it's done. How does that work for you?
I do. So I have a couple different critique groups that I do. So I do one through ITW, which I really like, and they sort of do like different like scene by scene. We do scene by scene critiques, which is fun. And then I have a group of women whose books all kind of came out around the same time, and we'll send each other like full books to read, which is
Yes.
also kind of a fun way to do it.
Yeah.
Um,
Nice to have
and
those
that
two touch points.
Yes, yeah. And it's a totally different experience just like reading a scene and thinking about like, well, how does like is this scene working in itself versus like what's the flow of the book and how does
Yeah. Because
this work?
theoretically, it has to work both ways, right? The scene has
Yeah.
to work, and then the scene in the whole thing has to work. Now, ITW is International Thriller Writers. For people who aren't familiar with the acronym, how did you? I haven't even heard that happened. So tell me about that critique group. Is that something they set up, or you just met people through that, or?
Yeah, they set it up. So I am not sure. It's been now a few years since I joined, so I forget what the join-in process looked like exactly, but they have like a formal critique group. Every now and then they'll open it up to new members, or maybe you can put your name on a list and say that you're interested, and they'll sort of match you up with different authors who are doing things that would sort of fit with what you're doing.
I love
Which
that.
is great because and that one I got involved in before. I think it was maybe like right before my first book came out. And so I didn't feel like I hadn't, been to Thriller Fest yet and I hadn't met like other authors.
Yeah.
And so it's a really nice way to get connected and meet other authors and people who are doing the same thing you're doing.
Those organizations, I think ITW, Mystery Writers of America. Actually, I never wrote romance, but I was raised by romance writers, as I like to say, and because I had a really good girlfriend who was writing romance when I started writing. And I do think the organizations that sort of connect you with other people doing the same thing,
Mhm.
because as much as like our friends, our friends, our family, our spouses are like supportive, they really don't understand unless you're married to a writer.
Yeah.
They don't really understand what it is. I mean, I remember when like I'd spend 6 hours at the computer and be like, yeah, I wrote 300 words. And everyone was like, is that good? Is that bad? They have no idea. So
Yeah, I think it's so helpful having people who understand. And I do have like, I have like my text chains with like my writer friends, and
yes,
you can celebrate, you can vent together. It's just really, I like it's huge. I don't know how I would do it without having people around who like get what you're going through.
yeah, you absolutely have to have a community. And I think, and particularly like the road to publication is long and
Oh
hard.
yeah.
So did you have how did you have a community then, or were you sort of braving that on your own?
So I did a local critique group in Philly when I was working on the first book. So I had that group, but it was not like a group that had like lots of information about the publishing industry.
Right.
So the publishing industry was mostly just like trial and error, trying to figure out like, I was like doing all my Google searches on like how do you get an agent and like what
Right.
do you have to do?
Right.
How does this work? Who are these people?
Thank God for Google.
Yes. I don't know how, I mean, I don't know how it worked before Google existed,
Well,
but
I there were books. Like I remember like when I found my
okay.
first agent, there was like a, AIR book, the American Agent Authors. I can't remember. Authors Representatives. Anyway, it was like a whole book. You get,
Okay.
Barnes and Noble or Borders and you found this book and you flipped through and you tried to like suss out who represented who by the acknowledgments in books. It was actually,
Mhm.
I mean, and you mailed your book in like snail mail.
Uh-huh.
So this is like now I'm like it was like dirt roads and uphill both ways. So I am also really grateful for the way that it's changed, and it's so much easier to connect, I think, with other authors now, which
Oh
is
yeah.
such a big deal. Are you coming to Thriller Fest this year?
I am coming. I'm very
Oh,
excited.
yeah, I will be there. I will see you there.
Oh, nice. Oh,
Yeah.
awesome.
So excited. So can you tell us a little bit of what you're working on now? I know sometimes people are like, nope.
Yeah, so I can give some very vague details because I think everything's probably, I mean, it's all still in flux, so it could all still change. But it is a story that is set at a Michigan lake house in the winter. So the characters may or may not get snowed in at some point, and it's about a family and and specifically three sisters who understand their past very differently from each other. And so that's sort of the broad
Good.
outline.
I love that. And there is such a sense, like I think with siblings, I'm the oldest of four, and I do think we all have such a different interpretation of like what went wrong. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
we all,
Yeah.
not probably wrong the way these sisters are going to experience, but wrong. And now I know that you're an attorney or by trade. Were you working when you were writing that first book, or by then you had kids, and so you were sort of balancing kids and writing? How has that worked out for you?
Yeah, so I practiced law for about 5 years after law school. And then I got pregnant with my son, and I was at a law firm and kind of trying to figure out like, do I stay at the law firm? Like, how does that work? And I'd always wanted to try to write a book. So I was like, well, this seems like a good time to do it. And if I don't do it now, then I think I will probably just never do it. So I'm gonna like jump in. So I quit like right when I had my son, and then was writing during his nap times and like doing that whole thing, which was, I mean, like I wasn't sleeping that much, but
Right.
it was like really nice to have that outlet where you like have something that you're thinking about and a project that you're working on. And then also then you get to go back to the like very physical, like very like in the world role of like trying to raise a child. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it was a nice mix.
It's a nice to have something that's yours. I think the transition between working and not working, whether I mean, and I was also, I actually worked with both kids and was writing in the evenings.
Oh, whoa. Yeah.
That was insane. But only for a brief time before we moved to Montana. But also, I think, and I assumed, of course, that it would be so lovely to have all this space and time. But it's a weird transition between sort of the work and because when you at a job, you are given, most of us, right, are less sort of self-driven because we're given tasks and
Mhm.
people say this has to be reviewed or done or whatever. And so you sort of you get to autopilot a little bit, right?
Uh-huh.
When you're a writer, it's like nothing is, I mean, once you're in the publishing process, there's some of that, you get your copy edits, you get whatever. But most of it is like nothing happens unless you are like, well, I guess I'm going to sit down and, create a chapter.
Yeah, that's right. So I did like a 500 word count for myself every day where I was like, I have to sit down and get my 500 words done.
Yes.
If I do that, then I can feel good about myself. And then if I didn't hit it, I would feel like really bad about
I know,
myself.
you're like, this is torture, right? Yeah, I feel. And then did you sort of so I'm assuming that's 5 days a week and you took the weekends to be with the family. Or
So
did
I work through the weekends
you
because I if I don't work through the weekends, then I lose my train of thought. So
Everybody says that. I mean, that is,
yeah.
I'm not always good at doing that, but I do feel like if in the middle of a project, it really almost demands it, right? Because
Yeah.
otherwise, it's almost like having a conversation. I always feel like it's writing a book is a little bit like having conversation with your friends who are in crisis. You're like
Mhm.
always like you have to touch base every day to know like what's the latest, what's the drama.
Uh-huh.
And if you miss 3 days, all of a sudden like everything has changed. You've lost the thread. I think it is a bit like that. So are you still doing
Yeah.
that now with um
Yeah, so now that my kids are in school more, my daughter's in preschool and then my son's in elementary school, I'll try to do 1,000 words a day, and that's my goal. And then and like periods right now, like when it's like, oh, I'm trying to do promotion stuff, then I try to give myself more of a break on that. But yeah, that's the
Yeah, the business, I mean, I mean, this is the other thing about this is it's the unfortunate side of writing, which is that we're really not, I mean, the promotion stuff is, I think, torture. And it's, you're handing it to a bunch of like, at least my experience is kind of introverted, a lot of awkward types. And then you're like, promote it, promote yourself, promote the book. And you're like, "Oh, here's my, please buy my.
Oh yeah, you're like sending out people who have just like shut themselves into their room for like
Yes,
a year.
yes,
And
yes.
then you're like, now come out and like be
Come out and
social.
then like sparkle and you're like,
Yes.
yeah, I totally I mean I was always so grateful when the book is and that process is done and you get to sort of go back and be reclusive.
Yes. Go back to your room.
I totally appreciate that. Well, this is so exciting. Tell our listeners where they can find you to follow you, social media, website, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so my website is AllisonBuccola.com, and then my Instagram handle is Allison Buccola.
Like
Yeah.
it, super simple. So Allison has two L's, and if
Mhm.
you're listening, and Bucola is Buccola.
Buccola. Yeah, thanks.
I had to look at it in the just to make sure. I was like two C's, right? Two C's. Anyway, and if you can't see this fabulous cover, it's really I love what they've done here with the hands and the eerie um the woman who's the solitude of this. Anyway, so super fabulous. So Allison, it was so fun to get a chance to talk to you.
Yeah,
I
this was so nice. Thank you for having me on.
so fun. I love this book. It was really fabulous. And I agree with you about the interesting thing about sort of the dealing with cult sort of after the fact. Because I think that is that's super, super it's much less common. It's super interesting because of course that's a permanent you know, it's a permanent what am I trying to say? It has a permanent impact on your psyche when you've gone through that kind of thing. So, especially as a kid. So, anyway, super fabulous. I look forward to the next book, and I will look forward to seeing you at Thriller Fest.
Yeah, I'm excited to see you too. Thanks so much.
Everybody, thank you for joining us. This was Killer Women with Allison Buccola, and we will see you next time. Bye.